You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Experience a membership that backs your business journey with American Express Business Platinum. When you pay with membership rewards points for all or part of an eligible flight booked with a qualifying airline through Amex Travel, you can get 35% of those points back, up to 1 million points back per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast? Smart move. Being financially savvy? Smart move. Another smart move? Having State Farm help you create a competitive price when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the personal price plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Thank you so much.
Join our Patreon for extra episodes, interviews, extra content, and to help support the podcast and help us continue to do the work we do.
Go to patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl to learn more. This is the other side of the Pharos, the dark Pharos, the shadow Pharos that lures us all to our beach. You stand in the prow of a borrowed ship, the hot wind scraping your hair back from your temples, while at your back the men row. At your back the wreckage of Pharsalus. That last day, Caesar's 500-foot running forward, their spears spiked at your cavalry, and now you are fleeing that battlefield where you left it, democracy dying in the dust. Not your fault, Cornelia says, but of course she would say that. When her freedmen told her you'd lost the battle, she'd fallen to the ground in grief. Then she'd picked herself up and run through the city, through the grand plazas and teeming markets, and down to the docks and into your arms. And now she's a fugitive too. Behind you both that smoking battlefield, the place where you tried and failed to preserve all that you knew. Whatever Rome will be next, it won't be what it was. Even so, Cornelia tells you, there is hope. She reminds you of client kings with deep pockets and vast resources, more likely to bet on you, Pompey, Rome's greatest general, than an upstart dictator like Caesar. Your navy is scattered to the winds, but all you have to do is call. So do that, Cornelia says. Call your ships, your men, your allies, call them all to you and rally. Put everything back like it was. But Caesar's arm is long. You need a safe refuge, and you know just where to go. Egypt, ancient land of the Pharaohs, and land of the Ptolemies, your own close friends. The boy Ptolemy will shelter you. Surely he will. He owes his throne to you. Surely his father has told him. It is a long, lonely voyage. The Egyptian coastline is treacherous. Miles and miles of unbroken coastline, low, parched desert, hidden reefs and sandbars, no fresh water or succor. You sail at night to avoid Caesar's spies, and all you can see is the desert hulking low to the south, the sea stretched away in every other direction, and above you, the indifferent stars. Until, there it is, you see it. A different star, somehow closer and brighter and cold like a terrible flame. It looms on top of a shadowy mountain that can only be dimly perceived against the night sky, higher than any monument, and a chill shoots down your spine. In an instant it seems you are sailing toward a cold, dark land where no shadows are cast and all fire is edged in blue. A terrible premonition curls your fingers on the rail. But the next instant Cornelia is at your ear. Come out of the wind, darling husband. And her voice is so ordinary. Here, in this cold, remote place, it does not belong. It is not her time. You turn to her with a warning, but the words will not form. The ship keeps on moving toward that terrible eye. You remember its name, just as you are guided below, and that name burns in your gut like a swallowed coal. the Pharos. I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy, and also getting major throwbacks here, Jenny.
I know. I had to revisit our Pompey and Pharsalus Julius Caesar episodes to remind myself what was happening, but this is relevant. You'll see.
Oh, I know.
And this is Ancient History Fangirl. Today we have gathered here to discuss the newest installment in our 7 Wonders of the Ancient World series, the one that didn't even make the list until the medieval era. Maybe? It's a question. The closer you look at the Pharos, the more everything starts to look like a question mark. That's what I've discovered. The Pharos, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, is our topic for today, and it has changed drastically over the years. And so has what it represented. But I think we'll all agree that it belongs on the list. Unless maybe we don't.
I mean, Jenny, you did the research. If you can't sell us on this belonging on the list.
It absolutely does belong on the list, but there's so much contradictory and confusing stuff about what people say about the Pharos that you'll see why everything about it is a maybe for me. Everything. The Lighthouse of Alexandria became iconic in both the ancient and medieval worlds. People began to call it the Pharos after the island it stood on. In some later languages, that became the word for just lighthouse. Pharos in Greek, Faro in Italian and Spanish, and phare in French. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was built sometime between 283 and 246, or potentially 271 BC, during the reigns of Ptolemies I and II in Egypt. So, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was built sometime between 283 and 246, or potentially 271 BC. The dates are quite fuzzy, during the reigns of Ptolemies I and II in Egypt. It stood for approximately 1,600 years or so, and in that time, it came to represent a beacon of light and learning. But it also represented other, darker things. And looking back at it today, trying to glean its picture is like looking through a clouded mirror. We have reams of information and records and drawings, but so much about its historical record is contradictory, mysterious, and impossible to corroborate.
To understand Pharos, the lighthouse, you have to understand Pharos, the island. It was both a safe harbor of its own, a source of fresh water and refuge for sailors, and a home to a community with a fascinating history all their own. Before it met a tragic fate at the hands of ghost of the podcast, Julius Caesar.
The ghost that will not stop haunting us.
He's always got something to say, and I'm not inviting him on because I'm not interested.
I mean, I did include swaths of the commentaries, actually the Civil Wars.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can get by without seeing him this episode, but you never know. He's a real live wire.
Jen has less and less control over when he manifests.
It's starting to be a real problem. Anyway, for millennia before the lighthouse was built, the island of Pharos was strategically important. It was a small, roughly crescent-shaped island on the western rim of the Nile Delta. Diodorus Siculus, writing between 60 and 30 BC, tells us why that island was so important. Quote, quote,
Do you want me to say it?
Yes.
Quote.
I love it when she goes, quote, but I can't do it the way she does. A really dramatic way.
Quote. Jen loves it when I say things dramatically. What was the other thing you liked? The salmon leap, right?
Salmon leap. It was just your Vermont accent. And I was like,
It's not an accent. It's just a silly voice. The salmon leap.
Oh, I love that. Don't we love that, listeners? I think we love that.
I haven't talked about the salmon leap enough lately. It just hasn't come up.
I know. Salmon don't leap enough. So, again, quote, the voyage along the coast of this sea, the Mediterranean, is exceedingly long, and any landing is especially difficult. For from Perietonium in Libya, as far as Iope, in Coele, Syria, a voyage along the coast of some 5,000 stades, roughly about 500 miles, there is not to be found a safe harbor except Pharos. And, apart from these considerations, a sandbank extends along practically the whole length of Egypt, not discernible to any who approach without previous experience of these waters. Consequently, those who think that they have escaped the peril of the sea, and in their ignorance turned with gladness towards the shore, suffer unexpected shipwreck when their vessels suddenly run aground, and now and then mariners who cannot see land in time because the country lies so low are cast ashore before they realize it. Some of them on marshy and swampy places, and others on a desert region.
So, the island of Pharos broke up an endless stretch of undifferentiated, low, sandy coastline that stretched off into desert and continued like that for over 500 miles. It was the only safe harbor for 500 miles. Landing here was treacherous. There were sandbanks under the water pretty much the whole way. And remember, this was the ancient world, when ships were not built for long durations at sea. They had to hug the coastline. They had to land frequently to get water and food, and I guess just let people go to the bathroom, good lord. And in the endless deserts of North Africa around the region of Egypt, there were not a lot of places to do that. That's where the island of Pharos comes in. The island guarded a curved isthmus that offered a protected natural harbor. It was a source of refuge. It was also a source of precious fresh water. The earliest mention of the island of Pharos is in Homer, believed to date to around the 800s or 700s BC. In the Odyssey, he says, quote, "Now there is an isle in the sea surge off the mouth of the Nile that men call Pharos, a day's run for a hollow ship with a strong wind astern. There's a good anchorage there, a harbor from which men launch their trim ships into the waves when they have drawn fresh black water."
So Strabo, who lived from 64 BC to 24 AD, has something else to say, Jenny. He says, quote, "Pharos is an oblong isle, is very close to the mainland, and forms with it a harbor with two mouths. The shore of the mainland forms a bay, since it thrusts two promontories into the open sea, and between these is situated the island, which closes the bay, for it lies lengthwise parallel to the shore. Of the extremities of Pharos, the eastern one lies closer to the mainland and to the promontory opposite it, the promontory called Lochias, and thus makes the harbor narrow at the mouth. And in addition to the narrowness of the intervening passage, there are also rocks, some under the water and others projecting out of it, which at all hours roughen the waves that strike them from the open sea. So, imagine the Bay of Alexandria here as being formed by a curved banana of land. A banana of land. A land hammock. A land banana hammock. No.
The Bay of Alexandria is the double dick guy of bays. Imagine that.
Double dong Chiron?
And in between the double dong is Pharos.
There's a banana hammock?
I think that metaphor is starting to stretch a little.
You think? So the water in between this banana of land sort of straddles two isthmuses.
There are two isthmuses, is what we're trying to say.
Isthmi.
They stick out from the land like two penises.
Oh boy, like double dongs. So in between the two isthmuses,
we're doing great. And in between the two cocks
lays, not what you'd expect, lay the long, narrow land of Pharos. The location of the island gave the bay two entrances, but it was not easy to land on the double dong.
We're not talking about landing on the double dong. We're talking about landing on the middle thing in between the two dongs. The chode area, if you will.
The chode, yes. But it was better to try and land on the chode area than anywhere else in this sort of general vicinity, I suppose.
It's better to land on the chode. Better to land there than to land on either one of the double dongs, I'm pretty sure. People lived on Pharos. At the time, people lived on Pharos, and we don't know how old the community was on the island of Pharos. Like, I haven't seen anything about how far back the archaeology goes, but we do know that there was a community there long before Alexandria was built. There was also a fishing village on the mainland, right on the eastern isthmus, the double dong, the eastern dong, that curved along the eastern edge of the bay. And that is where Alexandria would eventually founded, is on that isthmus. And the village that was there before Alexandria was called Rakotis. And while these two villages might have seemed like a backwater compared to the international, diverse, and worldly Alexandria that would eventually become, this area was probably an important stop for ships and trade for thousands of years before the city of Alexandria was built.
The archaeology backs this up. Undersea discoveries in the Bay of Alexandria suggest that at times the island of Pharos was incorporated into larger man-made port structures. Local engineers took advantage of natural features like the curving of the isthmus and the island of Pharos, as well as building breakwaters to shelter the bay. Reefs have been found just off the coast of Pharos, with ancient anchors still embedded in them. There are extensive breakwater structures under the waves here. some of which may be as old as the 1900s BC, making this one of the oldest ports ever discovered in the world. Some sources suggest that at times there may have been a naturally formed corridor of silt or sand connecting Pharos to the mainland, formed by wave action. This would have broken the harbor into two distinct halves.
So, for hundreds or maybe thousands of years, the port at Pharos served as a rest stop for travelers, as a marker for the entrance to a deep harbor, a safe place to tie up for the night with good anchorage and a village where sailors could resupply. Philo of Byzantium, who is one of the original makers of the list of 7 wonders, he lived from 280 to 240 BC, tells us that there was an annual celebration on the island of Pharos in his time, thrown by the Jews of Alexandria, but attended by everyone. Apparently, this was an absolute rager, celebrating the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. But it was not always a safe place to land. When Homer describes this island as a refuge and a place to draw fresh, black water, he doesn't mention the land pirates.
The land pirates. Oh, I'm so excited, y'all, for land pirates.
You know who tells us about the land pirates?
I know. I'm not saying his name.
I had to ask him specifically.
Is there a baby in your life who's about to start solid foods? This can be such a confusing and stressful time. As a mom of 7, I really struggled with spoon feeding my oldest baby. But once I realized that babies can safely feed themselves real, wholesome foods using the principles of baby-led weaning, feeding the rest of my babies became an actually enjoyable experience instead of something that I used to dread. Hi, I'm Katie Ferraro, college nutrition professor and dietitian specializing in baby-led weaning, and I host the Baby-Led Weaning Made Easy podcast. Each week, we cover evidence-based, safe infant feeding practices for parents and caregivers of babies who are 6 to 12 months of age. So, if you're confused by all the conflicting info you hear about starting solid foods, or you want easy, actionable tips on how to safely prep food for your baby, or introduce allergenic foods, or figure out when to drop a milk feed, we cover all that and more, plus interviews with the world's leading feeding experts in 2 new episodes each week. Search Baby-Led Weaning wherever you listen to podcasts, and happy feeding.
Throughout history, royals across the world were notorious for incest. They married their own relatives in order to consolidate power and keep their blood blue. But they were oblivious to the havoc all this inbreeding was having on the health of their offspring. From Egyptian pharaohs marrying their own sisters to the Habsburgs' notoriously oversized lower jaws, I explore the most shocking incestuous relationships and tragically inbred individuals in royal history. And that's just episode 1. On the History Tea Time podcast, I profile remarkable queens and LGBTQ+ royals, explore royal family trees, and delve into women's medical history and other fascinating topics. I'm Lindsay Holiday, and I'm spilling the tea on history. Join me every Tuesday for new episodes of the History Tea Time podcast, wherever fine podcasts are enjoyed.
No one hates history, they just haven't found the right teacher yet. Or in this case, a nerdy best friend who loves to tell you all about world history, women's history, and weird history. Hi, I'm TK, the creator of For the Love of History podcast, a place for people who want to learn more but don't know where to start, and history lovers who want to break from the mainstream. From rat trials to warrior women, we cover topics from every country and era. Whether you're a history expert or just starting out, there's a place for you here in the Time Machine. So join me every Friday on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube for a brand new topic. See you there. Bye.
Anyway, it's possible the island wasn't inhabited in Homer's time, but in the Roman era they were mentioned in a number of sources, these land pirates. What the Roman era sources tell us is that if your vessel got wrecked on the island of Pharos, the people who lived there might strip it down to the studs and sell it for parts. Some said that they were perfectly willing to steal everything on your ship, including the clothes off your back, even if you weren't shipwrecked and had just landed there to replenish your water supply. Maybe they'd even cut your throat for good measure. But also, sometimes sea pirates plundered the land pirate village as they passed by. The island of Pharos was not a safe neighborhood for its inhabitants either. It was a tough neighborhood.
The ghost that haunts this podcast, Julius Caesar, went to Alexandria in 47 BC. When he fought the Alexandrian War, he famously tried to get a foothold on the island of Pharos for tactical purposes while he was fighting off the forces of Cleopatra's brother, Ptolemy XIII.
I'm 11!
He was actually 11 for most of this.
I think that, like, by the time Caesar got there, he was probably, like, 14 or something. But he was 11 for a large part of that one episode we did that he was in, so that just has stuck. He's 11 forever.
So, here's how Caesar describes the island of Pharos. Quote, "This island, lying over against Alexandria, makes a harbor, but it is connected with the town by a narrow roadway, like a bridge, piers 900 feet in length, having been thrown out seawards by former kings. On this island, there are dwelling houses of Egyptians, and a settlement the size of a town, and any ships that went a little out of their course through carelessness or rough weather, they were in the habit of plundering like pirates. Moreover, on account of the narrowness of the passage, there can be no entry for ships into the harbor without the consent of those who are in occupation of Pharos."
I love how he gives us some very specific details here.
I mean, don't praise him too much, your ghost fiancé. So apparently, there were visible breakwaters off the coast of Pharos built by previous kings.
And I was so fascinated by these 900-foot breakwaters. I was like, oh, are those the 1900s BC breakwaters? Some of that was possibly visible in Julius Caesar's time.
Yeah. And I have questions about how they built the breakwaters and I guess why they built them. Were they a remnant of like the ancient tsunami?
It could possibly have to do with tsunamis because there were structures built here to reduce wave action. But the other thing is, there was a strong, I believe it was an east to west current in this area, and they built breakwaters to still that water, like to create a barrier that provided like a still pond that people could sail into that was like shelter from storms and rough seas, you know? So that's what the breakwaters were for. And there were people building them, I guess, in different places at different times to, you know, create the harbor shape that they wanted. And the other interesting thing that he says here is that the entrances to the bay were so narrow that nobody got in without permission from the people who lived on Pharos. Like they had control over that bay, which is a lot of power in this time period.
Yeah, and at this point in time, they were not on Caesar's side during the War of Alexandria.
Shocker.
They weren't a fan of the dictator?
Are you telling me that somebody wasn't on Julius Caesar's side? I'm shocked. Shocked, I say. Anyway, so that's why it was important for Caesar to gain a foothold on Pharos during the Alexandrian War. If you want to know all about the Alexandrian War, we have episodes on that going very far back in our catalog. Cleopatra and the King of Rome, and I think Cleopatra and something else. I forget. There's two of them. It was Julius Caesar and Cleopatra's first date, and it was real intense.
It was a real quarantine, like full 10-month-long date.
Okay, so anyway, all that is to explain why it was important for Caesar to gain a foothold on the island of Pharos. And the fierce land pirates must have really pissed him off because Caesar seized the island and killed all of the villagers. The Alexandrians on the mainland were so mad about this that they rushed across the causeway that connected the island to the mainland in that time and drove Caesar and his soldiers into the sea, pelting them with rocks. Caesar almost drowned. This is like one of my favorite parts of the Alexandrian War. I love it. And as far as I know, as far as I can tell, that was probably the end of the village on Pharos because I haven't seen any mention of it in later sources since then, except one writer who mentioned a few old seamen, quote unquote, living near the lighthouse.
So, now that you're acquainted with the island of Pharos and its tactical position in the bay and its importance to the ancient sailors and, of course, the land pirates, we can move on to the lighthouse itself, also confusingly called the Pharos after the island it's on. Alexander the Great founded the city of Alexandria in 332 BC on that curved double-dong isthmus to the east of Pharos.
The Eastern Dong.
He formed it on the eastern side of the bay where Rakotis already was. And we've seen some historians suggest that Rakotis remained the native Egyptian quarter of Alexandria as the city expanded, and that the Egyptians' famous volatility and hatred for their Greek pharaohs, the Ptolemies, began with Alexander imposing his city on their town, which makes a lot of sense to me.
There is very little about the Seven Wonders that isn't colonizer related, except the pyramids.
I don't know Temple of Zeus at Olympia. I mean, I guess it's about Greek Hellenistic might.
Colonizing an older woman-centered religion.
Yeah, I haven't got to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon yet, so I don't know. And I don't know about the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, but we'll find out.
Or Halicarnassus, but we'll get there, you guys. So far, there's been a lot of colonization. And the Pharos is not an exception, and we're going to unpack all of it.
Hot.
Sexy. The people of Pharos at this point, while Alexander was founding Alexandria, the people of Pharos just continued living on Pharos as land pirates, plundering any ship that was unlucky enough to land there, plus getting plundered in return occasionally. They had another few centuries before Julius Caesar showed up at this point, but the island would not remain unchanged. After Alexander the Great died, just about a year later in 323 BC, his general Ptolemy I Soter, the savior, not like he stuck on himself or anything, took control of Alexandria. So General Ptolemy I Soter, the savior, took control of Alexandria after Alexander's death, and he ordered an artificial causeway built to connect the island of Pharos to the mainland. And like I said, there was sometimes like a natural sort of spit of land or bank of sand that connected the island to the mainland sometimes before this. Like it was just formed by wave action, but this is when they actually formalized that and built something there. So the causeway was roughly 3/4 of a mile long, and it was called the heptastadion, which was Greek for 7 stadia, the unit of length the Macedonian Greeks used. It was said to be lavishly decorated, with carvings and statues in a combination of Egyptian and Greek styles, and it divided the harbor in half, protecting it from the strong east to west coastal current.
The eastern side of the harbor became the Portus Magnus, the Royal Harbor or the Great Harbor. The western side was the Portus Eunostus, which was mainly used for commercial traffic. There were 2 channels through the heptastadion to allow traffic to pass between the 2 harbors. Julius Caesar had them blocked during the Alexandrian War for nefarious war-making purposes, which I'm sure pissed off the people quite a lot. There was also an aqueduct built inside the heptastadion to supply the village on Pharos with water. Construction began on the lighthouse during Ptolemy I's reign. The dates here are a bit fuzzy, as they always are, I feel like. Different sources say different things about when the lighthouse was started and how long it took to build. Most sources say it was begun during Ptolemy I's reign, completed during Ptolemy II's reign, and took roughly 8 to 12 years to finish. Ptolemy II reigned from 283 to 246 BC, so that's usually the span of dates given for when the lighthouse was completed. Although realistically, it could only have been finished within the first 12 years or so of his reign, if those numbers are correct. So let's just give it a ballpark number of 283 to 271 BC.
Right, just to have some kind of a more accurate pinpoint, although it could be completely wrong that it took 8 to 12 years. We don't know.
I feel like 8 to 12 years is a number that I see thrown around a lot in these construction projects, so it is tough to know.
It is. It's like 2600 BC. It's just like the number they throw out when they need a number. One name tied to the construction of the lighthouse was Sostratus of Cnidus. He was a friend of Ptolemy I, who may or may not have been the architect who designed the lighthouse, and who also may or may not have paid for it to be built. According to Strabo, Sostratus paid 800 talents of silver to build this lighthouse, which I've seen estimated as anywhere from $3 million to hundreds of millions and millions of dollars in today's money. According to Pliny, Sostratus was the architect, and Ptolemy graciously allowed him to put his own name on the monument. But Lucian, the satirist, tells us that Ptolemy said, "Forget it," when Sostratus made this request. So what Sostratus did was inscribe Ptolemy's name on the plaster that coated the stones, and then carved his own name underneath on the stones. So when the plaster wore away, it would be his name that remained. Sneaky.
Almost like the dude who was building it knew how to actually get away with getting what he wanted and still making the guy who paid for it happy.
So anyway, this contradictory story about who exactly got to sign the Lighthouse of Alexandria is typical. There are so many contradictory and heavily mythologized stories about the Pharos. One of the biggest examples of contradictory and confusing information is what the Pharos looked like at any given point in time.
Parsing out what the lighthouse looked like has been a bit tricky. The lighthouse stood for approximately 1,600 years, and it was destroyed and restored many times. what it looked like in the Roman times may have been radically different than what it looked like in Islamic times. And actually, what it looked like in Islamic times is not that clear either. The descriptions vary widely. However, the most detailed descriptions we have of the pharaohs come from Islamic sources, dating mostly from the 900s to the 1100s AD. This is where we get the traditional idea of what the pharaohs looked like. But that traditional description may not have been the whole picture. The pharaohs had been destroyed and rebuilt many times during the Islamic era. And some writers suggest that the way it looked in the Islamic era, the more elaborate monument it was restored to, was different than how it looked in Roman times and in Ptolemaic times.
So not every writer agrees that the pharaohs looked different at different times. I've seen many historians, probably the majority of contemporary historians who talk about the pharaohs today, describe it as if it only looked one way from the day it was built to the day it fell. They take the later descriptions from Islamic writers and extrapolate those backwards as if Ptolemy I built it like that originally. And that may or may not have been the case. And I'm going to explore that and talk about what it may have looked like during the three phases of its existence, from Ptolemaic to Roman to Islamic times. But first, I want to give you guys a starting point. Before I talk about what the pharaohs may have looked like at different points in its history, I want to give you a picture of the legend of the pharaohs, the traditional image of it that you'll find in later sources that, if you just Google what the pharaohs looked like, this is what it'll tell you.
If you look at our social media graphics, this is probably the one I chose.
Well, the social media, like what you'll find about the pharaohs, like sometimes it looks like a pyramid, sometimes it looks like the Tower of Babel. Like there's all kinds of illustrations that show it looking completely different.
Well, that's why I'm saying like it will probably be some of the more dramatic ones.
There are lots of medieval drawings of the pharaohs that don't look like the traditional description of the pharaohs, is what I'm telling you. But anyway, so I'll just give you what that traditional description is. So according to tradition, the lighthouse stood approximately, let's say, 338 feet tall, making it one of the tallest structures in the world. Still more than 100 feet shorter than the Great Pyramid, though. It was built in 3 layers. It was like a structure on top of a structure on top of a structure. The lowest structure, was a square layer built on a wide platform with a wall around it to protect it from the waves. The second layer was an octagonal structure, and the third was round, was like a cylindrical structure. On top of the third structure, the top one, stood a statue. Some said it was a statue of Poseidon, others that it was a statue of Ptolemy I. Still others insisted it was a statue of Zeus with a lightning bolt or even a paddle in his hand. Some believed that the Zeus with the paddle was the world's first weather vane, rotating to show which direction the wind was blowing in.
On the very top, on top of this statue, a fire.
Where the light was is questionable. Like, it was probably on the topmost structure inside the sort of dome cylindrical structure, or it may have been at the feet of the statue, or something. We don't know.
On the top, somewhere, a fire was kept constantly burning, magnified by a set of large bronze mirrors. Some said the light could be seen as far as 300 miles out to sea. It was so powerful it could be focused to set enemy ships on fire. And if you focus them, those mirrors, just right, you could use the mirrors to see all the way to Constantinople, over 1,500 miles away. I mean, every time I see like tricks with mirrors, I'm reminded of the 1999 movie, The Mummy, and it just brings me joy.
Well, these were mirrors that you could apparently use to spy on people in Constantinople, according to some sources. The Alexandrians are watching you masturbate.
I was going to say, the Helios is watching you masturbate. Clearly, there is a lot of mythology here. What's truth and what's fiction? Let's try to figure it out.
And in the meantime, we're going to rewind and take you all the way back to the very beginning, to when the Lighthouse of Alexandria was first built. And remember, this timeline is not agreed upon by everybody. Some people think that the pharaohs had 3 structures the whole time and looked the same the whole time and had a mirror the whole time and all of that. But I'm just more interested in the idea that it changed, and I'm picking that route to explore. Pele, Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes, fire, and rebirth.
Maeve, Celtic warrior queen and nemesis of heroes.
Kiyohime, Japanese fire-breathing snake demon.
Pesta, Norwegian spirit of the Black Death. Our book, Women of Myth, is a fascinating look at women and femme characters in world mythology, including goddesses, heroines, and monsters. With captivating illustrations by Ringo Award-nominated artist Sarah Richard, it's the perfect gift for the mythology lover in your life, including yourself.
Find Women of Myth wherever books are sold.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Your planet is now marked for death.
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four: First Steps is now streaming on Disney+.
We will protect you.
As a family.
Light them up, Johnny!
Marvel's first family is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
That is fantastic.
And critics say it's one of the best superhero movies of all time.
Oh!
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four: First Steps, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
What time is it, Ben? It's clobber time!
So the Pharos of Alexandria was built at the beginning of the Ptolemaic period, roughly between 284 and, let's say, 283, 84, 271 BC, question mark. And yet we don't have many, or actually maybe any, visual representations from this time period, and we only have one written description that I know about until the Roman period. The only description that we have that I found from Ptolemaic times is from Posidippus of Pella, a poet and epigrammist in the court of Ptolemy II. So Posidippus was a friend of Ptolemy II, and he probably wrote this when the Pharos was built. So this was a quote that you can find that was apparently around, like, at the very beginning of the Pharos. Some say it was inscribed on the lighthouse itself. He said, quote, "The Greek savior god, O mighty Proteus, shines from Pharos thanks to Sostratus of Cnidos, son of Dexiphanes. For Egypt has no cliffs or mountains as the islands do, but a breakwater, level with the ground, welcomes her ships. And so this tower, cutting through the breadth and depth of heaven, beacons to the farthest distances by day, and all night long the sailors borne on the waves will see the great flame blazing from its top, nor miss his aim. Though he run to the bull's horn, he'll find Zeus the savior sailing Proteus by this beam."
So Proteus was an ancient sea god with a skill for prophecy who was probably more ancient than Poseidon. And I'm just going to clarify, he was definitely more ancient than Poseidon. He's like the original sea god. He's kind of very much mixed up with the mythology of the Old Man of the Sea.
Not the one from Hemingway, but the one from Homer, right?
Not Hemingway. These are sailors pre-Hemingway, long before Hemingway. There were men who talked about, the Old Man of the sea god. So, in Homer's Odyssey, Proteus lived on the island of Pharos. And there's a few things to notice here. Notice that Posidippus mentions Zeus, but as a sailor, not as a statue at the top. Meaning,
he does kind of imply that Proteus is at the top.
He does. And also, that Proteus is the person who can guide all sailors, even the gods who are sailing these seas, to safety.
What he's kind of implying here is that Proteus is the statue at the top, right? Are you reading that too?
I am.
Something about sailors born on the waves will find Zeus the savior sailing Proteus by this beam. Like, maybe he's implying that Zeus is on top too. Like, I've seen other people suggest that that's what that means. So I'm confused by this passage.
So there's a lot to be gleaned from this passage, and what you get depends on the translation. Michael Dennis Higgins, in his book 7 Wonders of the Ancient World, has part of it translated as, quote, "This tower, in a straight and upright line, appears to cleave the sky from countless stadia away during the day, but throughout the night, quickly a sailor on the waves will see a great fire blazing from its summit, and not miss Zeus the savior."
So I just want to pause because that translation sounds totally different from the other translation. And I think that that is just one example of how tenuous these descriptions can be, because he gets so much of his idea of what Ptolemaic lighthouse looked like based on that translation. This translation very much presents Zeus as being the statue at the top a lot more obviously than the other one. Number one, it's not like as up to interpretation. And number two, Higgins believes that this passage is describing not a tower with 3 layers, as in the traditional description, but 1 layer, straight and upright. Like, a lot hinges on the straight and upright line. In this translation, that does not appear in the other translation. At the top is a statue of Zeus specifically. He believes that in Ptolemaic times, the whole tower was the rectangular structure that would become the bottom layer in more recent times, and that the top was just a simple platform with a statue of Proteus Zeus, who knows, in his quotation it's Zeus, and some signaling hearths. While no sources mention how tall the lighthouse was in Ptolemaic times, we can get a sense of it from Islamic writers who measured the rectangular layer later. According to some sources, it stood about 252 feet high, with a width of 98 feet at the bottom, tapering to 85 feet at the top. This shape, the tapering rectangle, has a basis in ancient Egyptian architecture. It's been found in many pylon gateways to ancient Egyptian temples.
One thing about the Lighthouse of Alexandria is that it doesn't appear in Philo's original list of 7 wonders, or in most of the ancient lists that got circulated around this time. And remember that the lighthouse is dated to around Philo's lifetime. It may have been under construction when he lived in Alexandria, but it's also possible that, as grand as it was, the lighthouse didn't become the towering structure of legend until much later. And that's why it didn't make the list. Higgins suggests that the fact that it wasn't on Philo's list hints that this was the case. Bettany Hughes, in her book, The 7 Wonders of the Ancient World, paints a picture of what the inside of the tower might have looked like. She describes a first floor large enough to house a garrison of soldiers, shelter for animals and supplies, and a lift that would carry food and fuel up to the top of the tower.
She also describes windows, and ancient Roman coins from the time period back this up. The bottom layer of the Pharos, or potentially the only layer in Ptolemaic times, the rectangular layer, had many windows. And to understand why, you have to look to the elements. This location was exposed to the sea and the wind. That would have been less true in Ptolemaic times, as the shore was farther away when the Pharos was built, but even then, it must have been a dramatic place. Today, if you walk out to where the Pharos used to stand, you'll encounter fierce winds and a strong, boiling sea that crashes against the rocks.
Oh, this reminds me of when we were in Hanya, Jenny and I, a few years ago, and there had been a really big storm, and the two of us walked out to like the old harbor, and we walked out to the breakway where you would eventually be able to get to the lighthouse and everything else. And just watching the waves break and feeling that wind, it just felt like you went back in time.
Yeah, it would have been like that, but maybe even stronger.
Oh, even stronger. Bettany Hughes says, quote, "The air here at the end of the mole, the link to the mainland, still seethes with the wind that whips straight off the sea. One can imagine the miracle of the skyscraper stones, known more properly as the Tower of the Isle of Pharos, standing against such might." Like other scholars, Bettany Hughes believes that a tower that tall in that location would have needed many windows, so the strong winds of the area didn't knock the building over. So in theory, a terrible wind always raged through the tower, ripped from the sea and still wet with spray. Oh, the atmosphere. I'm going to write a romantasy about this. I'm done. Done. This is my next project, y'all, is a romantasy set here.
Which makes you question how they kept that flame alight all the time. Like, if the wind was so strong it could literally knock the tower over, how are they keeping that flame burning all the time? I ask you.
I think the mirrors were the trick. I think the flame must have somehow been inside, and the mirrors, like those bronze mirrors, reflected it out.
Well, I think we're getting to that. So during Roman times, you have more descriptions of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, and you also have images on coins, mosaics, and other artwork. What those images show, largely, is a building with a bottom layer, which is a rectangular tower, like, kind of tapered. And on top, there's a platform with statues that kind of jut out from the edge, kind of like the gargoyles that jut off the, corners of Notre Dame before it burned down.
Yeah, I wonder if those statues had a similar purpose, which was guttering.
Maybe. But I think that they would have been a lot bigger than your average gargoyle, like just from the scale. And on top of that platform was a smaller structure, possibly around sort of a cupola or something. And on top of that was a very large statue. So the first layer, the rectangular layer, was comparatively large, maybe 4 or 5 times as large as the second layer, just eyeballing it. And it had multiple levels of windows. 5 levels on one coin, I counted, but it's hard to tell if that was real or just kind of representative. I don't know. Roman images also show a monumental door framed with huge lintels a little ways up the tower, so not at the bottom, but like a little ways up, and a ramp that leads up to that door.
AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Roman writers describe the lighthouse. Perhaps the earliest one was Ghost of the Podcast, Julius Caesar himself. Quote, "On the island, there is a tower called Pharos, of great height." And this tower he's talking about is the lighthouse. "A work of wonderful construction, which took its name from the island." This was in 48 BC. Strabo, who visited the city in 26 BC, says, quote, "The furthest point of the island is a rock, washed all around by waves, which has a tower marvelously constructed from white stone and with many stories, having the same name as the island." I love that they keep calling it a tower, but not a lighthouse.
That's interesting.
Right? The next description we get, as far as we know, is from Lucian, a Roman poet who lived over 100 years later in around 65 AD. He wrote an epic poem called the Pharsalia about Julius Caesar clashing with Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, in which Pompey was defeated and fled to Alexandria, where, as we all know, he was sadly beheaded.
On a beach, I'm sorry to say.
In front of his family.
And this poem is perhaps the first place outside of that carving by Posidippus of Pella where a light is mentioned. Because you notice that Strabo and Caesar don't mention a light. In the poem, Pompey uses the light of the Pharos to guide his ship to that beach where he is ultimately beheaded. And here is what the poem says. Quote, "When Pompey left these shores, having passed all the cliffs of Cyprus, which extend toward the south, from there he is turned by the crosswise swell of the vast sea. He did not reach the mountain thanked for its nocturnal light, and scarcely touched with obstinate sail the lowest shores of Egypt, where the seventh river, the greatest part of the divided Nile, rushes into Pelusian shallows."
There are a few things to note here, right? First, that Pompey wouldn't have seen the Pharos before he reached Alexandria, because remember, he wasn't going to Alexandria. He was going to the fortress of Pelusium, which was all the way on the other side of the Nile Delta, about 189 miles east. The Nile Delta is very, very wide.
Picture an open fan. It looks like that.
And he would have been coming from east to west, so he wouldn't have passed the Pharos at all.
But second, the way Lucian describes the lighthouse has been described as ominous. He calls it a mountain. He describes its nocturnal light. And while the translation I've read doesn't really give me an ominous vibe that much, I've read other descriptions of this passage in English where the writers have clearly translated this themselves or are reading another translation that I haven't seen. And like we were just talking about the Posidippus translation, like a lot hinges on how it's translated. You know, we are looking at it through an imperfect lens. Anyway, so just in case I'm missing something, here's one of those writers talking about this poem. And I just had to go down this route because I was so fascinated about this image of the Pharos as this sort of ominous nocturnal tower drawing you to your death. This is from an article called The Pharos Alexandria, a Man-Made Mountain in Lucian's Bellum Culiae by Laura Zientek. Probably mispronounced that. Apologies. Quote, Lucian weaves a threatening, it's probably Lucan actually. Lucan weaves a threatening visual web in his descriptions of the Pharos lighthouse by borrowing imagery from the natural environment and from architecture, and by alluding to previously established geography in the Roman epic tradition. The Pharos stands as a symbol with potential funerary context and even shares its nature-based label with the pyramids, which are also called montes. In its connections to monumental tombs and its use as a landmark in Lucan's description of Pompey's final journey, the Pharos is a looming threat that signals Pompey's impending doom. So just imagine it, Jen. You've just lost the battle of Pharsalus, the battle that was supposed to save your beloved democracy, the only world you've ever known. And you're sailing at night, a famously dangerous activity in the ancient world. And there, looming up in the blackness, a high, unearthly light emanating from the top of an improbably tall tower, luring the sailor Pompey not to safety, but to his death.
I mean, it's so dramatic. It's so literary. It's so just like heartbreaking and beautiful and maybe a little over the top. But yes.
The way it's described, this passage by Lucan, it's Sauron at the top of Barad-dûr. It's Stephen King's Dark Tower, a massively tall, mysterious tower full of windows shining an unearthly light. You have no idea what goes on in there. And at the top is a spinning galaxy, an all-seeing eye, a harbinger of death and terror. This is the other side of the Pharos, the Dark Pharos, the Shadow Pharos that lures us all to our beach. Michael Dennis Higgins suggests the fires at the top of the lighthouse were probably rarely lit in Ptolemaic times, as sailors in the 200s BC avoided sailing at night. Of course, this is just one theory. It isn't known for sure. But as Jen noticed, the Romans, up until Lucan, don't talk about the fire at the top of the Pharos. That's interesting, right? And it is notable that after the initial construction and that inscription by Posidippus, we don't hear about the light again until it's luring Pompey to his death at night. And it's possible that it wasn't even lit in Pompey's time, and this is all just sort of a literary fiction, because it's also a literary fiction that Pompey would have even seen the Pharos, because he wasn't even going in that direction. Anyway, so let's talk about the light that we see. Notice how in Lucan it's shining at night now. Michael Dennis Higgins suggests in his book, 7 Wonders of the Ancient World, that there is a reason for this, that the light started to be used more regularly at night in Roman times as increased trade traffic meant that ships had to sail at night or dusk more often. And again, this is only one theory.
It might also be, like I suggested, that they found out how they could keep the light burning amongst all this wind and salt spray in a way that they hadn't been able to do earlier.
And it may have had to do with that second structure on top of the first structure.
So, one of the next descriptions of the Pharos we get is that of Pliny in the Natural History in 77 AD. And here's how Pliny, our friend Pliny, describes it. Quote, "There is another building, too, that is highly celebrated, the tower that was built by a king of Egypt on the island of Pharos, at the entrance to the harbor of Alexandria. The cost of this erection was 800 talents, they say." And I'm glad I said quote, because I would never phrase it that way. And not to omit the magnanimity. What Jenny said. That was shown by King Ptolemy on this occasion. He gave permission to the architect, Sostratus of Knidos, to inscribe his name upon the edifice itself. The object of it is, by the light of its fires at night, to give warning to ships of the neighboring shoals, and to point out to them the entrance of the harbor. The only danger is that when these fires are thus kept burning without intermission, they may be mistaken for stars, the flames having very much that appearance at a distance. Notice how Pliny describes these fires as being like stars, able to be seen from a far distance, and emitting a steady light. In all that wind. Writing in 78 AD, the Jewish writer Flavius Josephus claimed that the light could be seen from 300 stadia, roughly 30 miles out to sea. Modern researchers have used his description to estimate that at this time, the Pharos may have been as many as 393 feet tall. Statius, writing in 89 to 96 AD, called it, quote, night-wandering moon.
So it's around this time that some writers suggest that the lighthouse may have been fitted with its famous mirrors. And again, this is only one theory. Those mirrors could have been installed on the lighthouse since the time of the Ptolemies. All of this is based on when certain things are first mentioned or not mentioned, and the evidence is a bit thin on the ground, but I'm going with it. It's around this time that we get these descriptions of a very steady light, as steady as a star or a moon, and visible from a long way off, hinting that the lighthouse had been fitted with some kind of technology that allows a steady light to occur on top of a lighthouse that would have been subjected to a lot of wind. Because that is one of the most wondrous features of the Pharos. That's one of the things that made it a wonder. It's enormous bronze mirrors that could be used to focus the light of the ever-burning bonfire. What did these mirrors look like? We don't know. If they existed, they were probably enormous. They may have been positioned at the foot of the giant statue of Zeus or Poseidon or Ptolemy or Proteus or whoever that was.
The bonfire itself is another mystery. Apparently it burned very steadily and very brightly, even in a wildly windy place, exposed to sea spray. How did they keep that fire burning so steady and so bright all the time? Perhaps that's why a second structure, a little cupola, was built on top of the first layer to give that fire more height, but also some shelter. Of course, it still needed to be open so people could see it, and perhaps that was how the mirrors originated. Another question has to do with how the fire was fueled, and we've seen it suggested that the Egyptians probably didn't use wood for fuel, as wood wasn't that common in Egypt. Theophrastes and Pliny the Elder both claim the Egyptians used papyrus roots as fuel for fires.
They don't mention this in connection to Pharos, they mention it just as a general fact.
Yeah. They rolled papyrus roots into bundles and lit them on fire. They also used dried animal dung for cook fires, although that probably wouldn't produce a bright enough fire for the Pharos. Some have suggested a fire fueled by a naphtha mixture, which we think is probably more likely.
Yeah, if you listen back to our episode on Greek fire, people were using naphtha. I haven't done a deep dive into things that were everlasting flames, which occurred occasionally, like the Vestals had to tend one, for example, but it's possible it was being used in those contexts. So a naphtha mixture may have also been one way that they kept the fire going. One theory I've seen is that Archimedes created these mirrors, and Archimedes was a mad scientist type guy who lived from 287 to 212 BC. So he was theoretically around during the right time period. We do a whole Patreon episode on him and these wild weapons he supposedly created.
His wacky inventions.
All his wacky inventions. It's pretty great. While there's no evidence or proof in the ancient sources that he had anything to do with the Pharos, some sources do say he created a kind of death ray weapon using mirrors to focus the light. Of course, those sources are from the 1100s AD, and they are probably wrong. But another place we see claims of a death ray cropping up that burned ships from a distance is linked to the Pharos. That is also from around the same time period. I think actually more from the 900s AD. I have to double check. It's also probably wrong. But it's just interesting that those are two connections that we have here. Either way, this structure would have been highly visible. Between its immense height, its beaming whiteness, multiple ancient Roman sources describe it as white, probably covered in white plaster.
Probably covered in seagull poop.
And seagull poop, yeah.
Just bird poop in general. That would make it white.
So Stratus of Cnidos carved Ptolemy's name in the bird poop, and then as that wore away, it revealed his name.
Until the birds pooped on it.
Until the birds pooped on it again, and it was just a cycle. Anyway, the bright, unwavering light of its fires and the smoke that rose into the sky to call people to the island that said, here be refuge, here be a bay you can land on that you'll possibly get your stuff stolen by the land pirates, watch out. Or you might get beheaded. Land at your own risk, you guys. Travelers to Egypt couldn't possibly miss the entrance to the harbor of Alexandria. You'd have to be blind to miss it.
And Roman writers acknowledged that point. In the 100s AD, Lucian of Samosata, the satirist and early novelist, wrote a sci-fi novel called Icaromenippus, in which his protagonist journeys to the moon and knows the earth is below him because he can see 2 of the 7 wonders, the Lighthouse of Pharos, which would not have been a wonder then, and the Colossus of Rhodes, which would not have been standing then. This is 100 AD. Yeah, it wouldn't have been standing then.
So in the 200s AD, a writer called Achilles Titius.
Ooh, Achilles and his Tatis. Achilles Tatius.
Achilles Tatas, who lived in Alexandria, described the Pharos like this, quote, "The most remarkable and extraordinary structure upon which it rested, it was like a mountain, almost reaching the clouds, in the middle of the sea. Below the building flowed the waters. It seemed to be as it were suspended above their surface, while at the top of this mountain rose a second sun to be a guide for ships." See, now it's getting described as a sun, that light up there. It's been a moon, it's been a star. Now it's a sun. There's got to be some mirror action at this point.
In around the 300s AD, Epiphanius of Salamis says, and this is a quote that we're using from the Bettany Hughes book, The Seven Wonders of the Ancient World, quote, "The Tower of Pharos, the first wonder, it is held together by glass and lead and is 600 yards high." 600 yards is about 1,800 feet. And this is pretty legendary, but we get to something interesting. First, someone was referring to the lighthouse as a wonder by the 300s AD. Most writers think it didn't appear on the list of the seven wonders till medieval times. But here's a writer from the 300s AD describing it as a wonder, and also the, quote, glass and lead. Hold on to that thought, listeners. So, that's it for this week. In the next week, we'll take you up to the Islamic times, where some of our most detailed descriptions of the Pharos and some of our most fantastical stories about it date from. We'll also talk about the modern archaeology and what divers are finding at the bottom of the Bay of Alexandria. Swoon.
And in the meantime, you can catch up with us on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, at Ancient History Fangirl. And you can, if you would like, sign up to our Patreon for extra content and extra episodes. And that is at patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl.
Yeah, want to find out all about Archimedes' wild and wacky weapons? It's on the Patreon.
Anyway, so I gotta thank these Patreon members. Apologies to anyone whose name we mispronounce. We really hope we don't. Thank you so much to Janelle Watson.
Ruse. Just Ruse.
Luke Hares? Or Hares. I don't know which. Apologies if I screwed that up.
Alex. Just Alex.
And Perry, just Perry. Thank you so much for your support, and to all of you listening, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you whenever we see you next.